Okay, this is an application of our distance formula, so it's a harder question, but it's certainly not impossible. It wants us to prove that the points 1, 1, 3, -1, and -1, 3 are the vertices, or the corner points of an isosceles triangle. So I've actually plotted here these points. So you can see here's the point 1, 1, here's the point 3, -1, here's the point -1, 3, and I've joined them all up. And it's wanting to prove that they are the corner points of an isosceles triangle, okay? An isosceles triangle. An isosceles triangle has two sides equal in length. So what we need to do is we need to work out the distance between A and B, the distance between B and C, and the distance between A and C. So we'll do that first of all. Let's work out the distance between A and B. We use our distance formula. So always write your formula down first. Now, this is between A and B. So A is 1, 1, and B is 3, -1. So let's call this our x1 and our y1, and this our x2 and y2. So if we substitute in, the distance from A to B is equal to the square root of 3 subtract 1 squared plus -1 subtract 1 squared. So the distance from A to B is equal to 2 squared add -2 squared. So the distance between A and B is equal to the square root of 4 plus 4. The distance from A to B is equal to the square root of 8. I actually can leave it in that form. So that's the distance between A and B. Now let's find the distance between C and B. So the distance of C to B, let's write our formula again. And then let's substitute in the values. So C is -1, -3, and B is 3, -1. So let's call this our x1, our y1, and our x2 and our y2. So the distance from C to B is equal to x2, which is 3, subtract -1 squared, plus y2, which is -1, subtract -3 squared. So the distance from C to B is equal to 3 subtract -1 is 4, and we square it, and -1 subtract -3 is 2, and we square that. So the distance of C to B is equal to the square root of 16 plus 4, or the square root of 20. Again, we can leave it like that. So we found the distance from A to B and C to B, and now we need to find out the distance from C to A. So the distance of C to A, write out our formula again, our distance formula. Okay, C is -1, -3, and A is 1, 1. So let's call that our x1 and our y1 and our x2 and our y2. So again, let's substitute in. So square root of x2, which is 1, subtract -1 squared. y2 is 1, subtract -3 squared. The distance from C to A is equal to 2 squared plus 4 squared. The distance of C to A is equal to 4 plus 16. So the distance from C to A equals the square root of 20. So let's look at the distance that we have between these points. The distances between AB is the square root of 8. The distance between CB is the square root of 20. The distance between CA is also the square root of 20. So that means the distance between CA and CB are the same. So this distance and this distance are the same. an isosceles triangle has two sides of equal length. So yes, we have just proved that these points are the vertices of an isosceles triangle.